Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle podcast, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the New York Football Giants. I am John Schmeelk. We're joined right now by the CEO of Sumer Sports. He is former NFL executive. He's had many very important jobs for some very big organizations. I won't list them all because I'll be here for a long time. He is Thomas Dimitroff. Thomas, how are you, man? It's good to talk to you again.
John, I'm looking forward to it. This time of year, we're rolling, right? I know you guys are all popped up around there trying to figure out what's going to happen, I'm sure.
Yeah, number 6, it's a good place to be in a draft that I think has a lot of blue chip guys, but you can move up, you can move down, you can pick different positions. So let's start here. You've been in this chair before as a guy making personnel decisions for teams, Thomas. What is this time of year like? The Giant scouts just got back into the building late last week, so they're sitting down with the coaches, Joe Schoen, his front office staff. Like I said, the coaches are getting involved now, and you're kind of putting together your final draft board. What is that process like, and what do you think the most important aspects of that process is to make it successful so you get your board to where you want it to be?
Well, as we all know, this is an extremely busy time, and it's actually a relieving time when you finally get back to your office. You've gone through the combine time. You've played around in free agency, of course. You've been to the owners' meetings. You've been out to pro days. I mean, there's a lot going on, right? So as a general manager and as a head coach, Brian and Joe going out there trying to figure this all out as team builders, this is the time that you really want to sit back, take a deep breath, look at that big board. I don't know how they have it at your building there, but we took a look at that depth chart 40 times a day. When I was my last job with Dan Quinn, with the Falcons, you're a head coach and a general manager are always at that the draft board. They're always at the depth chart, always trying to revisit what needs to truly be reloaded, right? You'll always have a very good idea, but now you step back after all your travels and you really look at it. Where do we go in the draft? Is there any opportunity to go in the later parts of free agency and acquire, so that you don't have to do everything in the draft? The Giants have 6 picks this year, right? So it's not like they have a big load of picks to deal with. So they're really focused on how do we utilize them in the most effective and efficient way. That's how most general managers and head coaches would approach it now that they're back in the building. It's total massaging of the draft board right now. That is a big, big deal. And remember, last thing, John, of many, many more things, you bring in all the information from all your scouts who have been out on the road and all of your coaches who have been out working out players at their position groupings, and you're gathering all this information, and then now you're starting to tighten it up and make it nice and clean to decide on hopefully what direction you're going to go at 6 and beyond, of course.
As the GM, and you were the general manager of the Falcons from 2008 to 2020, Thomas, how much do you have to play referee between your scouting staff and the coaches, where maybe priorities are a little bit different, the way they think about scouting is a little bit different, and one group might really like another player, another group might not like that player and they like somebody else? How do you try to, bring those varying opinions together to come to a consensus decision so you have unity on that player that you select on draft day?
Well, let me start first by saying, the Giants are very fortunate to have a guy like Brian Daboll as a coach who has a very good understanding of evaluation, right? Anyone who has gone through the Patriot paradigm, most have a good idea how to approach. Some have better eyes, of course. Brian's always been known to have a good eye. Of course, his relationship with Joe Schoen is outrageously important, right, when they're putting together the team. So that's the very important start, because a guy like Brian Daboll is going to tell his coaches, you do your job. We've heard, and there's usually an expletive attached to that, right? But you do your job. You go out, you evaluate for us, you evaluate off the video, and then you come back with the information with your opinions, talking about him talking to his, or Brian talking to his coaching staff. And then Joe will go out and bring his scouting staff and all that information in. But in the very end, it's the head coach and the general manager sitting down together and making sure everyone is bringing the information they need, and then back off and let the head coach and the GM truly look to see how they're going to put it together. You can have certain organizations out there that listen to both sides, and there's no question you do. We like to consider it oftentimes a lot of of us who have been through that Patriot paradigm as pyramidal, right? It starts down here. There's a wide basin as you start moving towards the draft. In the end, it's the two decision makers at the very end. You know, as your owner has been saying recently, watching some of the quotes that have come out from Mr. Mara, I'm going to let the GM and the head coach make this pick, right? This is a big pick. They're gathering all that information from both sides, coaching and scouting. And what happens normally, as you probably know, John, there's a lot of banter, right? People have high opinions, people have low opinions, people, you know, how many flavors out there. Everyone has an idea of who they want for the organization, who they think is going to make the organization better. You just have to keep everyone in check so that it doesn't spin out of control, John. Otherwise, if the coaching staff is pushing hard on the scouting staff and the general manager, that can get quite reckless. And at that point, you're spinning around as an organization. And we've seen these before. That is not the Giants. Luckily, you have two men in charge who are taking care of business.
How much can you do specifically from the Giants' perspective here at number 6, Thomas, when you're thinking about, all right, maybe there's a player, theoretically it could be a quarterback, that you'd be willing to move up for, and the Patriots, who I don't know if they've made this decision yet, they decide, look, we're willing to move out of 3, right? How much are you able to work on some of these trade situations now, even though you might not know who's going to be available at 3 because you don't know who Washington's going to take, and that might impact how much you might actually want to move up. So there's a lot of unknowns right now. So how much as a GM can you work on some of those trade scenarios so if you have to wait till draft night, you can quickly pull the trigger on them?
It's a great question. I was really active probably the last 2 weeks before the draft. And what I would do, and I know there are people out there, it's that adage of prepare in times of peace, bleed less in times of war, right? Patton, whoever that was. The idea of making sure that you go out there, making calls to a lot of the people. And a lot of times what you do is you take your position, and then you don't have 10 picks in front of you, but you know, the 6 picks in front and then 10 or 15 picks behind. And you start working your potential trade asks, basically. And then what happens is you try to get a win-win or a fair trade at each one of those picks. So you can start thinking about what it would take to move back 5 or 10 or 15 or up. And then what I would do quite often is I would call the general managers of the teams and I would touch base and say, hey, Howie Roseman, you guys wouldn't be calling Howie to do any sort of trading, but you know what I mean. I would call Howie and I'd say, hey, look, are you guys interested at all in moving up 5 picks or back or whatever? And I would try to get a gauge on the general managers out there. Yes, I'd be interested. Talk to me on the clock. Or no way, I wouldn't be interested. We're not moving T. Because some people will give you that information. You have to, in my mind, you have to gauge interest and maybe levels of interest. It really helps. That can change on the fly, as you know, John, but it's a really helpful tool to make sure people out there know that you're willing. So the first time you talk to them isn't normally on the clock, because that can get a little hectic.
You love turf. You're good at it. So you start a turf biz. Business grows, your savings grow. Become the most celebrated name in turf. Are you ready for all that life brings?
Giants Huddle Podcast is brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. From game day to every day, Citizens is made ready for Giant fans with insights, guidance, and solutions. Learn more at citizensbank.com. So 30 visits are happening right now, Thomas. You get these guys in the building. And I want to lock in specifically on the quarterback position. We had Kurt Warner on a couple days ago, and this is a Hall of Fame quarterback. And he expressed how difficult it is for him, who obviously knows as much about the position as anyone, to evaluate these college quarterbacks. Because he's trying to evaluate them on plays where he thinks they're doing things in college that they would be asked to do in the pros, right? Go through their progressions. And he basically said that it's hard for me to really say based on the scheme they're in and not being able to sit down and talk to these guys. And Joe Shane has pointed out that meeting with these quarterbacks, in addition, is just as important as the film evaluation, right? To understand how their mind works, how they learn. You can see what their thought process is on certain plays, how they break down tape. So how important were these visits for you with quarterbacks to really understand how they're thinking and whether or not they can process at an NFL level? And how do you go about those meetings and what are you trying to get out of them?
So first, extremely important. I remember sitting down with Matt Ryan, and he was with the entire table, all of our coaching staff that were with us, the owner. Matt's up there on the board, you know, whatever he was talking about, and literally flipped the pen up in the air, sat down, and you were like, there was a little bit of sort of football genius there that I thought, okay, that's the number one thing I definitely need to check, right? The last thing you want is obviously a quarterback that doesn't have the football brain that you need. Massively important. We know that. You also, of course, get an opportunity to gauge the personality, the leadership, the communicative skills, right? Some people can articulate very well. Others, as smart as they are, John, are kind of flipping around, right? They just don't clearly communicate. So that was another opportunity to really see, is this person looking you in the eyes? Are they communicating? Are they communicating clearly, succinctly enough where appropriate? That's really, really important. How they interact with everyone else within a room. You know, if they are, let's call it the way it is, if they have kind of a sketchy side and they're not in tune with the 10 people that are around the table, along with an owner, you can gauge confidence, you can gauge insecurities. In my mind, there's a lot you can do there. Really, really important time. Remember, that's usually not the first time you spend time with them. You will have either met with them at the combine or at the school. This is the final one, though. This is the really important meeting where you're really drilling down on everything you need to check the boxes on, right? And again, if you walk away from a meeting that doesn't stir you and that doesn't like check the box on, this is the guy we want, this is the personality we need to lead, that's an unsettling feeling. Believe me, I've met with people before where you leave and you're thinking, there's no way I would take this guy. There's no way that this player could lead the troops. That's uneasy, right? When you think this is the guy we're hoping to lead us for the next 10 years, and you walk away from that live meeting wondering about his football intelligence, his ability to communicate, et cetera, et cetera. So vital times.
So when you think about a quarterback potential for the Giants here, you know, put yourself in the decision maker's chair for a second, where Daniel Jones 2 years ago plays well. Giants win a playoff game. They give him a big contract in the offseason. And then last season, everything goes wrong. He eventually gets hurt. The offensive line is in shambles in front of him. You have a really tough schedule early of games against, you know, Miami, the Cowboys, the 49ers. Nothing goes right. It's just a bad year. And now Daniel's under contract. You have to have him on your roster this year. Joe Shane has said he's going to be our starter week 1, assuming he's healthy from the knee injury. But you're sitting at 6, and you don't want to be picking at 6 very often. And I think this is probably around where you guys were picking when you drafted Matt Ryan, right? Where were you guys when you picked Ryan?
We picked third.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, general area. So you're not the Raiders or the Vikings, where maybe you're, you know, have no one in house where you feel really great about being a quarterback. So how much do you really have to evaluate this group? People say 4 guys at the top, however you look at it, but you're not going to like all 4 or 5 guys, to your previous point, right? So what does the buy-in factor have to be? Like, is there a guy that you'd be okay with at 15, but not okay with at 6? Does it have to be all buy-in no matter what? Like, how do you make that decision if you should draft this particular player at 6, or if you should go and draft an elite player at a different position, which might also be a premium spot?
Well, look, I think, first of all, there's a lot into this, as you know, whether you stay at 6 and pick a quarterback, whether you move up to 3 or 2 and go after Jaden Daniels, like make a legitimate move. I'm speaking here so you can kind of read between the lines here that, of course, I like Jaden Daniels. Doesn't mean that I don't like some of these other guys. I think there's some really good football players there. What a general manager and a head coach need to think about when they're sitting at 6 after they have spent a lot of money. I believe it was it 160 million? Is that what was
it was total 4 for 160, but the last year you can kind of get out of, so it was kind of like 3 for like 118 type of area.
That whole 160 for 6 games played, basically, right? So far, is that correct?
Yeah, correct. Mm-hmm.
That's a big move for the team builders to make, right? Mm-hmm. And to move to the idea of potentially saying, okay, we're cashing out, we're going to move on from this because of so-called injury history, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know how many sound mind general managers out there, and be careful about this, would wholeheartedly say, no, I'm moving away. I'm going to go up and get a quarterback. The thought out and I think smart way to approach this is say, okay, let's look at these scenarios. What would it take and what would we get moving up to 3 or 4? What would we get as picking a quarterback at 6? And what will we get if we traded back to pick a quarterback? Those are the 3 scenarios that are obviously really, really important, because I think in the very end, you need to look at it and say, look, we have really not truly dug in to Daniel Jones. We need to surround him with the best players we can. So we need to figure out the running back situation. Let me start by saying we need to figure out our O-line situation, which it seems as though they're starting to do. Need to figure out the number 1 receiver position. In my mind, I think you need to truly, and this was one of the things we did with Matt Ryan, you need to find out what you're going to do with your tight end. The idea of Waller leaving and not having the big time tight end waiting in the wings here, that's truly concerning for me. One of the things that I think organizationally a team in this situation should think about is not necessarily just a receiver at 6. There's some great ones there, and you know that. Let's put aside the quarterback thought and think, do we trade back and possibly get one of the best tight ends to come out in the last 10 years in Brock Bowers? Because here's what you have there. You have a high percentage shot who can run roughshod over most of the defensive backs, I think, in the league. He's a very special tight end. So that's another part of the scenario that you truly need to dig into, in my mind, that it's not just a receiver, that there are other ways to make sure you're surrounding this quarterback who needs to take it to the next level. You need high percentage count on go-to players. Sure, Neighbors is. That. I mean, I'm not talking about some of the other receivers out there. We know that. But with Brock Bowers, I think that is a consideration. I don't know if anyone in your world has been talking about that, but it's something to think about.
Yeah, look, I have Bowers in terms of a grade right with those top 3 wide receivers. I mean, he's a wonderful player. So Thomas, let's now dive into some of these individual guys that you brought up. Just curious to get your take, having a general manager's eye on these quarterbacks. But first, a reminder, Giant fans love a winner. It's why they love Citizens, named a 2022 best bank in the U.S. by The Banker as the official bank of the Giants and sponsor of the Huddle. Citizens is made ready for fans of Big Blue. Learn more at citizensbank.com. All right, how do you have these? You mentioned Jaden Daniels already, and Caleb Williams, we can kind of push him aside. I doubt that's going to be an availability. Like, how do you stack this quarterback group? Where do you kind of have your big gaps in terms of, tier wise, where you have these guys, who's worthy of a top 10 pick in your opinion, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, look, the Caleb thing is going to be interesting. We know that. So we don't need to talk about that a whole bunch. Let's just assume that he's going to Chicago. Let's think of trying to figure out, is it Jaden Daniels? Is it Drake May? Who is the next one up? And I think personally, I think they're both fantastic quarterbacks. Having been involved with the Falcons for a number of years and being around Matt Ryan, who did great things for us. Matt was a solid, adequate athlete, right? You realize more and more what a quarterback that has excellent athleticism as well as the ability to throw the ball. That's one of the things that I think Jaden Daniels is, right? He can break it open in so many different ways. He's my number 2. I love how he's progressed, by the way, over this last year. I think the ability to get a little weight on him. I think he's got special ability to do amazing things, not only the ball in his hand if he had to run, but of course move it. And if you can do that and keep defenses on their heels, we know how important that is, right? Very different than just sitting back there old style in the pocket, right? Drake May. I mean, Drake in my mind is the next one here. I think Drake in my mind, another big guy, good athlete. He may not be the same excellent athlete, like 2 steps up where Jaden Daniels is, and maybe Caleb Williams, but a good athlete, big, strong body who can throw. Some of his development, I still think it's going to take a little bit more time for him to develop, is my feeling. That's what differentiates between the number 2 and the number 3. We start talking about big. Well, you guys don't call it Big Blue. In Michigan, Big Blue, I'm talking about. We're talking about, JJ, and we're talking about McCarthy, right where he is right now. Is he worthy of being a top 2 or 3 pick. I mean, I've been hearing a lot about that lately. He's the interesting next wave, and I think there's a gap there, although I really like him. I think he's, excuse me, obviously very competitive, but I also like Bo Nix. And I think you start talking about Bo Nix, although a little bit older, where Bo Nix is, I think Bo is a strong guy. He's another athletic guy. He'll throw the ball, highly competitive, has a really good understanding of what his system was. So I liked that group in the top. I think Bo, even though they're talking about him being 12, 13, 14, you never know. If there's a run, all of a sudden someone right at that 10 spot might be thinking about him as well. Who else you want to talk about?
Yeah, one guy you didn't mention was Michael Penix Jr., right? So I'm curious to see, other than the medicals, which obviously we're not doctors, we don't know what the medical reports say. When you view him just as a player, Thomas, what are some of the things? Obviously, we know what he's great at, right? Downfield thrower, all that stuff, big time arm. What are some of the things just based on his tape that maybe have you concerned about how he might translate to the NFL game?
As I mentioned before, just his ability to move around in the same way and avoid in the same way, right? I mean, yes, we're always going to be concerned about the medical, right? As general managers, we overthink that because we do, and we have to. And honestly, a team like the Giants, anytime you've ever been stung by a little bit of that, even if you're thinking about moving back into 15 or 20, let's just say hypothetically, and Michael Penix is there, you are worried. Can you imagine being the same group of team builders and having to deal with something like that, a recurrence of an injury situation? So it's really tough not to go in to take a quarterback that isn't extremely clean. I think Michael's ability, or maybe limited ability, to move around like some of these other guys is, to me, what differentiates a little. Obviously, southpaw, right? Can hit it downfield. He's done great things there. I think he's more in the 20s and beyond, to be honest with you.
You're ready for a change. Payday comes early with Citizens, so go to that retreat. New You moves to the country. Now you're raising goats and launching a lifestyle brand. Are you ready for all that life brings?
So you would have then Nixon, McCarthy in that kind of teens type of area, and then you would have Penix a little bit behind them. Is that fair?
I would have McCarthy more. I can see McCarthy being in the top 10. When I said Bo Nix, I thought that he's a guy that you could possibly get it to 12, 13, 14 area. I'm thinking, just because there's so much hotness right now and focus, on JJ to try to figure out where he's going to go. But I think, again, this is a fun quarterback group to watch. Yeah. And I say fun only because you're not beating them up, right? They all have a lot that they bring to the table, but we all know the probabilities, right? We think we're excited about them, and then all of a sudden 3 of them don't work out. It's not easy, of course.
And that's what it's going to be. There's 6 of these guys, right? And 3 of them probably are not going to work out. That's just been what the odds are in the NFL. My final one on the quarterbacks, real quick. Do you see that top 7 quarterback in the league upside in McCarthy? I know he's a good athlete. He moves around, all the leadership and all that stuff. But do you see enough physical traits from him where you can see him in the future being one of those, Superman type quarterbacks, the Herberts, the Lamar Jacksons, the Burrows, that type of guy that can carry a team? Or do you think he's more of like your, Kirk Cousins, Goff type, where you have to have the right situation around them?
Like I said, I think I love his competitiveness. I love everything that the coaches are talking about from Michigan, and everything that he brings to the table. Obviously, that's really, really important. However, I do think that he's much more in the mid area there, right? He could have seasons where he could work up into the top 10,
sure,
11, 12, or he could go the other way towards the top 20s, because you just never know, right? In my mind, it will be really fun to watch how he develops. There is some question out there that I think people need to dig into, and they just need to find out, okay, where is he throwing to the left side of the field? If they can get their heads around this, and again, Coach Harbaugh, I mean, when you talk about Jim, he loves him, right? He loves him and I love the fact that he's so passionate about it. And that guy knows football, and that guy knows quarterbacks. So he has seen him come to the table with a lot of special elements. Whether he's outside of the top 10 or not, that will be remain to be seen. Hell of a football player.
Hell yeah, I like him too, to be honest with you. wide receivers at the top here, real quick. We got like 2-3 minutes left.
Yep.
Do you have these guys stacked as close together as everyone else? Is all three worthy? They could be top wide receiver in any class. And if not, why? And how do you have them stacked?
So so I do have them stacked that way. I have them stacked Marvin Harrison. I have them stacked Neighbors. And then for me, Adunze. Adunze? How do we pronounce that?
Odunze, I believe.
Odunze. Excuse me. Should know better than that. So, I mean, I guess the thing that I love about Neighbors, however, even though I do have Marvin and just over him a little bit, I love Neighbors' explosiveness. I'm a huge fan of route running, right? You can take some of the best athletes who might not be as rip off the top fast, but their ability to separate. One of the reasons that we went after Julio Jones, unbelievable route running ability for a guy who was almost 6'3", ran a route like he was 5'11". I mean, Neighbors, what he can do, separate, what he can do after the play, to me, and maybe eclipses is a strong word, but, overshadows where even Marvin is, right? Yeah. He's the guy that can stop, start, and do all kinds of stuff with the ball in his hand after. So Marvin, a little bit more on the size side of things, of course, has it over top of him, but it is really, really close there. And if I had to pick Neighbors over Marvin Harrison for one reason, or Harrison went just before, I'm not looking back. I'm not wandering around going, oh man, what a wah pick that was. No, man, it was kind of similar when we were looking at Julio Jones and we were looking at AJ Green, right? In the very end, we thought Julio was going to be better for us more so than AJ Green, right? Back in the day. So this could be a fun situation for the Giants if they do in fact go this direction.
Final question. If you're trying to make this move for the Giants, you don't go quarterback. You're sitting there staring at Bowers. You're staring at the three wide receivers, and then Joe Alt's sitting there too, right? You've already tried to address the offensive line in free agency, but it's been an issue for years. To your point, you want to shore things up in front of Daniel, but you need that number one playmaker too, Thomas. As someone, when you were their GM, you addressed offensive tackle. I think Jake Matthews, right? He was your pick in the top 10. You drafted obviously Julio Jones high. Where would you go with the Giants here if you're really trying to get the best situation around Jones with that 6th overall pick?
Well, look, you have to have the right protection, right? We all know that. We've all had those funky times where we thought we had the O-line to build with, and we still couldn't get there. I saw Joe Shane's comments out there about the O-line recently, right? He was pretty outspoken. You get a quarterback who's not given time, they can't produce, they can't learn, they can't grow. So that would be a very important discussion to have, with your team. You can find some receivers out there that can be really good for this organization in the 2nd round. It's a nice, strong receiver class. There's
also awesome. I'm sorry, go ahead, finish up.
Yeah, no, and there's obviously some really good O-linemen that are leading to, through the draft where maybe you trade back later into the 1st round, middle of the 1st round, and get another bona fide O-lineman. I don't know necessarily, though, if Alt is the person that you take there. I think if you're looking for O-line, maybe you think about trading back in the 12, 13, 14, 15, get some more draft booty, so to speak, and work with it versus taking the O-lineman at 6.
I'm on the same page. You get someone that's a natural right tackle too, if you want, right in the middle of that 1st round. There's so many guys that can do that. Thomas, tell the folks about Sumer Sports and where they can find all the great stuff you guys are doing.
Sumersports.com. We're a roster optimization group. We're out there doing a lot of really good work. We have some great intelligent people who know football really well. All kinds of great data out there for the fantasy side too. I think you'll really enjoy it. We have a great draft guide there that you all should check out as well. Sumersport.com.
Yeah, I have the draft guide. It's fantastic. You do great work with Eric Eager. There's a Sumer Sports Show on Sirius XM, the draft show, your podcast, the whole deal. Guys, go out there and find it. Thomas Dimitroff, former general manager for the Falcons, NFL executive from Sumer Sports. Thanks so much for the time.
You got it. Thanks, John.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next time on the Giants Huddle podcast, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants.